On that Saturday, the 22nd, I was inside of the reef, east of the reef, inside the lagoon there at Pillar Point, and I could see that the break, it was basically breaking all the way across, not only Mavericks, but then the reef waves were breaking over the reef all the way across the reef, and so in that wash and in the reef-forming waves, I saw Trette floating face down. He looked like a rag doll. No motion. He was just, his
Jacob.
Jake Trettes, yeah. His suit, his neoprene suit, was floating, and his legs were on the surface of the water. His legs and arms were on the surface of the water too. It wasn't like you're in the pool swimming and you do a dead man's float and your arms are dangling down. His whole body was on the surface of the water, just undulating on the surface of the water with the waves, getting tossed around and everything. I didn't see any. There weren't any jet skis in the lagoon at that point. They were all out. I couldn't necessarily see them. There were waves coming in where I can't see anything beyond that wave, right outside the reef. I was the closest one to. Well, and then Alex, he was 50 yards away and getting further away. He was just continuing to paddle towards the beach on his board. I don't blame him. He had just been washed through the reef. He was probably pretty tired and wanted to get out of the water for a little bit. He didn't even see Trette. He didn't see him. I was the closest one to. Well, and then Alex, he was 50 yards away and getting further away. He was just continuing to paddle towards the beach on his board. I don't blame him. He had just been washed through the reef. He was probably pretty tired and wanted to get out of the water for a little bit. He didn't even see Trette. He didn't see him.
At this point, you were the only one to have seen Jacob.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
In the wash.
Yeah, he was in a black wetsuit, and yeah, it would have been harder to see from further distance away. So I looked down. I had my marine radio in my PFD, so I took it out, turned it on, turned to channel 16, and broadcast a single emergency call, saying who I was, saying where I was, and saying what I was seeing. And I was directing this call at the Pillar Point Harbor Master. The controls on my radio are not the easiest thing you pretty much have to have it set up beforehand to get it to where you can even hear back, and this wasn't today, and I wasn't really expecting to use it. And the other thing is, I know from prior experiences, not direct experiences, but I know from prior experience that when you're making an emergency call, it can take 3 or 4 minutes of back and forth conversation for the responders to be triggered and to be sent out. They need to know who you are. They need to know where you are. They need to know exactly where you are, what's happening, and it just takes a while. And I didn't feel like taking the time, so I just made the call. I didn't even know if anyone heard it. I turned the radio back off, put it in my vest, and paddled over to Trette. And I got there and grabbed him by the wetsuit at the nape of his neck and pulled his head and upper body out of the water. Turned him over, and his head kind of flopped over, and water poured out of his mouth and nose. And that, along with seeing him in the first place, those are, I don't think I'll ever forget those. Those are pretty raw images, oof. So water pours out of his mouth and nose, and
You don't like it?
no, it's fine. I'm
Okay.
taking it's very helpful.
Just try to make it easy.
So at that point, well, turn him over, water comes out of his mouth and nose, and then it wasn't too long after that I get hit by a wave, and I actually had to keep myself upright by pushing on Trette, so pushing off of his body to keep myself upright, and which is kind of a horrifying thing. And then the next wave that came in, I decided, instead of trying to hang on to him, I can't clear the water out of his lungs. There's nothing I can do, and I have training. I'm trained to deal with scared students and hurt students, and I have wilderness first aid training. So I have all this training, but I couldn't do any of it. And I knew that if I couldn't clear the water out of his lungs, it wouldn't matter if he continued to float face down. So instead of trying to hang on to him and keep his head out of the water, I just let him go, and it made it easier for me to continue to deal with the waves at that point. And I had been flagging, waving my paddle here around way above my head. I did that while I was making a radio call. And then at various times when I got to Trette, I was waving it around. I did tell Trette when I first turned him over, "You're going to be all right, buddy," even though logically I didn't really believe it, But when I saw Jacob, he was, let's see, I'm just trying to get he was probably right in here. About 100 feet off of the visible, roughly 100 feet or so off of the reef, off of the visible where the rocks start. So he was way up just on the other side of the reef. He had already been washed through at that point. Russell came from outside the reef. He came around Mushroom Rock. So he came out like that. And I was able to flag him down and got Trette onto the board, and they went and landed right up kind of in the middle of the beach up here. And I knew they were around. And time is pretty crazy at this point. I couldn't tell you how many. I suspect it was about a minute and a half from when I first saw him that I looked out to the south and I saw who I found out was Russell Ord coming in on his jet ski. He was coming in around Mushroom Rock out from outside the reef. Came around the corner there and was heading in towards into the cove. He saw Alex first, and he went and got him. And I managed to get his attention by continuing to wave my paddle. And when he finally saw me, I angled my paddle over like this. I'm angling my paddle over at Trette.
Oh, right.
So he angles over to Trette. I paddle over there. He's got better leverage than I do, so he grabs Trette and pulls him up onto the rescue board on the back of the ski. I'm there. I kind of flop his legs on. And then, I don't remember if we were both thinking it and both kind of acting on it at the same time, or if I just kind of got his attention to the fact that he'd need somebody. I offered to come out of my kayak and pin Trette down on the board so that he wouldn't slide off on the transit to the beach. But then Alex was reasonably close. I think Ord took a quick zip over to him, and Alex climbed on the back and with his board and then pinned Jacob down on the board there, and then they zipped off to the beach. A lot of the training I've had, even wilderness first aid, you're dealing with someone who's conscious. And you're dealing with conscious kayakers who may be hurt or very tired or too cold to really care for themselves, but they're still conscious. That's a huge, having to deal with someone who's unconscious is probably the single worst situation that anyone has to deal with. So where the training came in was knowing that the only thing I could do, or the best thing that I could do, is stay there, stay upright myself, and be a flag. Wave people down. And I have this nice, big, tall paddle. I'm fairly tall myself, and I'm very visible out there, and I do that on purpose because I don't, if something happens to me, I don't want to go unseen. So I'm out there frantically waving my paddle, and it worked when Russell came around. I'm glad I was there. I'm very glad I was there. I'm glad I could help out in the way that I did, and I'm really glad Russell was there with his jet ski. And then overall, over and above that, it's just a huge relief to know that Jacob is not only alive but then is okay. I mean,
It'd be 100%.
100%. I mean, for crying out loud, that's amazing. Them at some point, that'd be nice. And really, it's a selfish thing at this point. I think I would really like to meet Trette at some point on down the road, face to face. At some point, you know, they say first impressions are really important, and just for the fact that my first impression of Trette was pretty bad, I would really like to meet him in person. You know, and logically I can tell myself that he's alive and well, and that's, you know, it goes a long way towards taking off the horror of that day.